Saturnine stories.
Our story begins on the evening of Wednesday, September 6th, 2006. 51-year-old Susan Kuhnhausen had worked a long shift at Providence Medical Center in Portland, a position she'd held as an ER nurse for over 30 years. Still wearing her hospital scrubs, she drove from work to Perfect Look Hair Salon to get her hair done on the way home. As she waited for her hair to be done, she thumbed through a magazine in the waiting area, with a certain passage catching her eye. I will not die an unlived life. I will not live in fear. Little did Susan know how deeply profound and prophetic that passage would prove to be. Arriving home after her appointment, she entered the home and disarmed the security alarm by punching in the code 1210, her wedding anniversary. Susan was immediately struck by how dark it was in her home, as both she and her husband never shut the curtains, but they were all drawn tight, bathing the house in an eerie darkness. Still, she had no reason to think much of it. Noticing a note by the microwave, she took it in her hands and read it.
Sue, haven't been sleeping. Had to get away. Went to the beach. Love, me.
The note was unsurprising, as the couple were experiencing marital problems, and fed up, Susan asked Mike to move out months before. He was only supposed to be in the home now so he could cat sit for her while she worked in the emergency room, but apparently Mike was gone to the beach for who knew how long. Typical, she thought with an eye roll as she walked outside to fetch the day's mail. Susan trudged up the walkway back to the house, thumbing through her mail, kicking off her shoes and setting down the envelopes on the counter. In the already dark and stuffy home, it occurred to her now how her bedroom was especially dark and foreboding. As she tried to focus on the darkness within her bedroom, pushing down the creeping unease that washed over her, suddenly, Susan's nerves shot to an electric fever pitch as a large, burly man emerged from behind her bedroom door. He wore a baseball cap pulled down low over his eyes. His long hair was pulled back into a ponytail, and on his hands he wore yellow rubber gloves, and in his right hand he was clutching a red and black claw hammer. She studied his every detail, readying herself for an attack and quickly thinking of what to do. Most women would cower in fear or try to run, but Susan Kuhnhausen is not your typical woman. Used to dealing with traumatic situations and subduing unruly patients, she and her fellow nurses at Providence Medical Center had been trained in self-defense and knew how to wriggle out of headlocks and chokeholds. At the time, she felt like she would never remember any of this training, but with the surging adrenaline within her, Susan recalled the training with remarkable speed. Instead of running away, Susan rushed towards the intruder, crowding him closely, assuming if she closed the distance he wouldn't be able to wind up and get a good solid swing with the hammer. As she crowded in close, he did manage one good swing to her left temple, and it's a miracle she didn't lose consciousness, as that would have given the stranger ample time to finish the job. But fate was on her side that day, and she stayed awake and focused. "Who are you? What do you want?" she shrieked, but he stayed silent and continued to try to subdue her. Susan was 5 feet 4 inches tall and had 2 bad knees from numerous injuries and carrying a considerable amount of excess body weight, and the stranger was 5'9", 5 inches taller than Susan, but she significantly outweighed his 190-pound frame. In an attempt to knock him over, Susan slammed her body into his, but he remained standing, pushing her against the walls of her bedroom, growling, "You're strong." His only words. This phrase from the man seemed to awaken the fight in Susan. She later remarked, "He is here to kill me. I don't know why, I don't know who he is, but his intent was clear." Susan pushed him again, even harder, defiantly demanding, "Who sent you?" The two began to grapple, again with Susan wrestling the hammer away from her attacker and landing 3 to 4 hard blows with the claw of the hammer on the man before he reclaimed the hammer. Susan responded by grasping his throat tightly, shouting, "Who sent you here?" while closing his airway. The stranger's face turned darkening shades of purple and blue. Susan, who was in the business of saving lives and not taking them, was startled by this and began to flee. "I don't know what I thought. I just had to get out of there." As she flew from the bedroom to the hallway, he caught her and punched her sharply, splitting her lip, causing Susan to fall to the floor. He was standing over me with the hammer. I looked at the floor and I thought, I'm going to die today. Unsure of how she even managed to do so, Susan summoned unfathomable strength and finally toppled her attacker to the floor, telling herself, "I've got to get the hammer." It was at this point that the man finally began to realize Susan wasn't trapped in here with him. He was trapped in here with Susan. As they wrestled, she began to bite him as hard as she could, hoping that even if she didn't survive this encounter, police would be able to track him down from her dental records or his DNA on her teeth. Susan bit his arm, his side, his thighs, and even his lower extremity through his zipper. While grappling, she even tried to wrestle his wallet free of his back pocket, hoping to throw it behind some furniture for police to find later. "I was like a down power line snapping on the pavement," she later said. After 14 minutes of intense fighting, Susan Kuhnhausen wrestled him face down on the floor, threw her left leg over his body, straddled him, and applied a forceful chokehold to the intruder, squeezing his windpipe with all her might. Susan leaned in close and snarled, "Tell me who sent you and I'll call you a fucking ambulance." Still, the man refused to speak and only growled. She leaned in, tightening her grip until he stopped moving. When the man went limp, she hopped to her feet, grabbed the hammer, and bolted from the home to her neighbor, who quickly called 911.
"911, what is your emergency?" "We have an intruder in the house next door. The intruder was in the bedroom with a hammer. The woman who lives there thinks she may have strangled him. He was down when she left." "Can you put her on the phone?" "She's bleeding." "Does she need an ambulance?" "No, she's a nurse. She says to call an ambulance for the guy. He may be dead." "What did she use on him?" "She strangled him." "What else did she do?" "She put a chokehold on him." "I've got help on the way. Stay on the line. She has a hammer here." "Don't touch it. Don't touch it. Just leave it there. She hit him on the head several times. That's the hammer he had with him. She struck him and she strangled him and she thinks he's dead." "Was he by himself? Did he have anybody with him?" "No. She expressed concern it may have been her ex-partner who sent the person." "Have there been problems with her ex-husband or partner?" "She did talk to Mike, her ex-partner, and asked him to house sit for the cats, and he said he couldn't do it. He was on his way to the beach. He left her a note. He knows the alarm." "Okay, that's good information to pass to the officers."
In a surprise to no one, Susan's marriage had not been a happy one. In 1988, loved ones of Susan placed a personal ad in the Willamette Week publication. "Someone different. Single white female, 33. Overweight but not over life. Seeks single male who wants more out of a relationship than just slender." "Hi, different," came one reply. "My name is Mike. I'm a 39-year-old divorced white male. I enjoy most things in nature, from wandering in the ape caves at Mount St. Helens to walking on the beach at sunset." They hit it off and first spoke by telephone January 30th, 1988, a date Susan knew because at the time she marked it in her notebook. The two spoke over the phone over 100 hours total, according to Susan's estimation. "He had a nice voice," she said. "I was impressed he wanted to talk about the deeper things." Their first date was in February 1988 at the Crystal Springs Rhododendron Garden near Reed College, where the pair fed ducks and threw unsalted peanuts to the squirrels. They were married that same year in Reno, Nevada, which suited Mike just fine as he enjoyed gambling and playing the slots. "It wasn't long after we married that there was no more hiking, no more getting out. It quickly became clear that he had lied about his interest in the outdoors and many other things, with Mike telling his new bride that he saw combat in Vietnam. Military records list him as a switchboard operator and note nothing about seeing active combat. Mike had a negative outlook on life, telling her his philosophy was, life is a shit sandwich, and every day you take another bite until you die. Chain-smoking, grumpy Mike Kuhnhausen, who worked as a janitor at Fantasy Adult Video, became increasingly controlling, closely monitoring every single penny she spent and demanding to know who she'd been with or where she'd gone whenever she left the house. His gambling addiction also worsened exponentially. It got to the point where if she went to kiss him, he would burp or pretend to be sick. After 17 years of marriage, Susan Kuhnhausen couldn't take it anymore and filed for divorce, ejecting him from their home in September 2005, saying, I cared about him, but I didn't want to live with him anymore. I wanted to be happy again. Unfortunately, Susan didn't change the locks or the alarm code. When police searched the home, they found the attacker's wallet in his back pocket, identifying him as one 59-year-old Edward Dalton Haffey, a Vietnam veteran with an extensive criminal record. The day after the incident, Susan's friend Helen Billone went with her to the house to retrieve her things. Helen pointed out to Susan that a backpack in the basement didn't belong there. The police hadn't noticed the backpack in the cluttered cellar. Examining the contents of the bag, they found a bottle of Hershey's chocolate syrup,
What the fuck?
$200 in folding cash, diabetic medication, a notebook, and a pay stub made out to one Edward Dalton Haffey. The notebook contained an entry for September 4th, 2006, and simply read, "Call Mike." There was also a manila envelope containing Mike's new cell phone number. Haffey was found to have a near-lethal dose of Kuhnhausen in his system at the time of his attack on Susan. He had been living in a trailer on the ironically named Northeast Killingsworth Street. Relatives stated he grew up in an upper-middle-class home and was an avid tennis player. 15 years prior to the attack on Susan Kuhnhausen, February 28, 1991, Haffey had solicited a similar attack on his ex-girlfriend, then 39-year-old Georgia Lee Dutton. Her body was later found along the Umpqua River. For this, he was caught and pled guilty to the crime and spent 9 years in the Eastern Oregon Correctional Institution. When he was released, he moved to Portland and began looking for work, finding a job working for none other than Mike Kuhnhausen, cleaning floors at Fantasy Adult Video. This is when the whole bloody picture came together for investigators. On the day of Susan's attack, Mike, who was never at the beach,
Yeah, go figure.
drove his gold Dodge Neon to the Oregon coast, checking into the Lincoln City Inn using his credit card. He drove back to Portland and spent $339 on a Taurus 357 Magnum revolver at Silver Lining Pawn Shop, with the intention to delete himself from this world. On September 8th, Mike left a single self-delete note at his father's home, writing, "All I ever wanted was to be loved, and every time I had it, I fucked it up."
You got that right.
Then he went on the run with police putting out a bolo for old Mikey boy. The coward couldn't go through with deleting himself, and police caught up with him at 10 a.m., September 13th, in the parking lot of Kaiser Sunnyside Medical Center, where Mike claimed to be checking himself in, saying he had nothing to live for anymore. After an 11-hour involuntary psychiatric hold, police arrested him for conspiracy to commit delete wife. Mike asked, "Am I under arrest?" Detective Steve Ober replied, "At this point you are, so what I'd like to do is re-advise you of your Miranda rights." Mike said, "You're not going to believe my side of the story." The detective replied, "Why is that? We haven't even heard your side of the story." Mike said, "My side of the story is so fucking off the wall." The cops didn't believe Mike's pleas of innocence or claims that he really had been at the beach that day. He'd been terminated from his job weeks earlier, and with Susan giving him the boot, he had no place to live. Upon initiating the divorce, Susan changed her brother to the beneficiary of her life insurance policy, so Mike knew he would get nothing that way. But Mike was still listed on the deed to the house and would get a $300,000 payoff if Susan was no longer around. When police arrested Mike Kuhnhausen, they already had employment records from Fantasy Adult Video proving Mike and Haffey worked together. Still, he tried to deny knowing Haffey. His story then changed, saying, "I didn't do it. Just because I know the guy doesn't mean I did anything." That may be true, but when you put all the evidence together, the plot was crystal clear. There were no signs of forced entry into the home, and security records show someone disabled the alarm while Susan was at work. Mike claimed this was him just walking inside to leave her the note and that he didn't let anyone into the house before rearming the security system. On September 18th, a former cellmate of Haffey told authorities that Haffey asked him to meet a man paying him for an insurance scam, that he was netting $50,000 for the crime, and he could make $5,000 just for assisting. The man offering the money was none other than Mike Kuhnhausen. The cellmate turned down the offer. On November 17th, another witness came forward and told police he'd driven Haffey to meet a bald man in a parking lot of an Applebee's just off the interstate, and later put two and two together when he saw Mike in the paper and identified him as the bald man. He could deny it all he wanted, but the weight of the case was overwhelming, said prosecutor Brian Davidson. On August 30th, 2007, as part of a plea deal, Mike pled guilty to his role in soliciting the crime and received only 7 years. Susan was extremely nervous and always looking over her shoulder, convinced her husband was trying to have her harmed from behind bars or that he would do so himself when he got out. So she began regularly practicing at the shooting range, got a top-of-the-line security system for her home, and placed gravel all around the outside so she could hear anyone creeping around outside. She didn't have to worry long, though. Mike Kuhnhausen was scheduled to be released on September 14, 2014, but cancer had the courage to do what Mike couldn't with that .357 Magnum and removed him from this earth on Friday the 13th, June 2014, just 92 days before his release. Susan Kuhnhausen now goes by the name Susan Walters and became a crime victims advocate, working with organizations in the Portland area such as Women's Strength, Girl Strength, and the Oregon Crime Victims Law Center. She worked closely with the District Attorney's Office creating Case Companion, a free website dedicated to supporting crime victims in the area. It's cases like these that show you that you can never fully trust anyone, even those close to you, and most of all, that you
don't fuck with Susan.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Two stories in one episode? Yeah, I know. I spoil you.
Our second tale brings us back to July 18th, 2015 in Charleston, West Virginia. Meet one Neil Martin Falls. The well-traveled 45-year-old unassuming security guard was unknown to the world and to the eyes of the law until he moved to Charleston and made a fatal mistake that cost him dearly. It was only then that the double life he'd always been living was finally unearthed for all to see. Neil Falls spent his time in Charleston searching through the back pages of seedy websites looking for companionship when he stumbled upon pretty young Heather Saul, who placed ads as an escort. The two started chatting, and Falls obtained her address. Showing up unannounced, Falls entered the home of Heather Saul, producing a gun and asking coldly,
"Live or die,"
as he placed his hands around her neck and began to close her airway. Heather Saul, surging with adrenaline, knew this was her fight for survival, and she attempted to fight the attacker off with a rake. In the struggle, Neil placed the gun on the ground so he could remove the rake from her grip, and this is the exact moment he made a very fatal error. Heather Saul quickly reached down and snatched up the pistol, firing blindly over her shoulder, catching Neil Falls right in the head, and after 45 years of life, it was time for Neil Falls to finally fall.
He just wouldn't let me get any air, and so I grabbed my rake, and when he laid the gun down to get the rake out of my hands, I shot him. I just grabbed the gun and shot behind me.
Heather ran out of the house and flagged down a neighbor who called 911.
Live or die? I'm guessing Heather chose live.
When police arrived to assess the situation, they discovered Heather Saul with a separated shoulder, broken vertebrae, and obvious marks around her throat from the struggle. It is then that authorities searched Neil Falls' vehicle and were shocked at what they found. 4 pairs of handcuffs, bleach, trash bags, a machete, knives, axes, a bulletproof vest, and a shovel, among other things. An obvious kill kit. It didn't take a genius to figure out that Neil Falls was either a serial killer or well on his way to becoming one when Heather put a stop to his double life for good. The more police looked, the more they found, and it quickly became apparent what Neil Falls had been up to all those years. Born September 24, 1969 in Eugene, Oregon, Neil Martin Falls was born into poverty along with his 9 siblings. The large family lived in various cities and towns across Oregon. From a young age, Neil showed an obsession with firearms and military paraphernalia, as well as a propensity toward mistreating animals. These obsessions were carried with him until the end of his life. Despite these interests, and what he would ultimately become, the young man abstained from drug and alcohol use and kept a clean criminal record. Starting out with unskilled manual labor, it was in 1992 when Falls moved to Greensburg, Kansas with his father, until the elder Falls passed away in 1995, at which time he returned to Oregon and found work as a private security guard, working for 8 years as a security guard at the Hoover Dam. He was caught by superiors at his job mistreating animals and was subject to disciplinary action. Around this time, he began to spend the majority of his free time with women of the night and trawling the back pages of websites selling female companionship. This dark side even led him to take a trip to the Philippines with the express purpose of sex tourism. In 2008, there seemed to be a massive change in Neil Falls when he was forced to resign from his job after allegations of sexual harassment. After this, he moved frequently, bouncing around between Oregon, Indiana, Kentucky, Kansas, and other states, where he was cited several times for traffic offenses, over 20 in all. In January of 2015, Falls discovered the woman he was in love with was actually secretly married, and in the same month his mother passed away. These events seemed to trigger his long-suppressed dark side, and twisted his mind into something much worse. The now distressed and increasingly changing mind of Neil Falls moved again to Oregon, then Texas, and finally West Virginia. Police found a note on Neil Falls' body, which turned out to be a list of 10 other women of the night. 9 of the women on the list were in West Virginia and 1 in San Diego. All were confirmed to be alive, but authorities believed the note was a list of future victims that he may have been stalking. Still, digging up information on Falls' secret double life was no easy task. With sleeping bags and pillows recovered from his vehicle, it was clear that he'd been living in his car, so he had no fixed address to track down. And no cash or credit cards were found in his possession, leaving it a mystery as to how he even managed to travel across the country. There are only a couple of photos on Falls across the entire internet as far as my research was able to conclude. His high school yearbook picture, his driver's license photo, and one brief police body cam recording where his face is only half visible in the frame, footage which was captured only 11 days before he met his end. Much about the man is still a complete mystery. It is now believed that Neil Martin Falls is a serial killer, with the FBI estimating he's responsible for sending at least 10 souls to the afterlife, but with more victims suspected. And he must have been good at it, as there is very little evidence tying him to his suspected victims, and no one had a clue what he'd been up to until the day he left this world. Around a dozen women vanished in and around Chillicothe, Ohio, and while there is no record of Falls' presence in Ohio, Chillicothe is a mere 2-hour drive from Charleston, West Virginia, and the crimes fit Neil's suspected modus operandi. And for a man who traveled all over the country regularly, a 2-hour drive wouldn't mean much. Neil Falls has never been ruled out as a suspect in the Chillicothe disappearances of Ladies of the Night. The disappearances supposedly miraculously stopped after Falls' untimely death. Police even looked into his involvement in a possible series of crimes attributed to the still unidentified I-70 killer, who is known to have ended the lives of at least 6 store clerks in the Midwest during the spring of 1992. All of the known victims except one were petite young brunette females. The outlier was a male, a victim, but it is thought that he expected a woman when picking that particular store. In 1993, 2 people were sent to the great beyond, and a 3rd victim was lucky to survive. This 1993 group of crimes is heavily thought to be the work of the I-70 killer, but as the ballistics testing confirmed, a different firearm was used in 1993. It is not 100% that the same perpetrator was responsible, though the MO was strikingly similar. In 2001 in Terre Haute, a 31-year-old store clerk named Billy Brossman was working alone at the liquor store when he was robbed at gunpoint and forced to empty the cash register. The robber then led him to the back of the store and deleted him from this life. Like the 1993 crimes, it isn't 100% known if the same attacker was responsible for the untimely demise of Billy Brossman, but authorities believe strongly that it very well could be linked, with the liquor store even being located just 7 blocks from one of the confirmed victims of the I-70 slayer. However, this crime is the only one with CCTV security footage of the crime, and while I can see a slight resemblance to Falls in the police composites, I don't see much of a resemblance in the CCTV footage, but I'll let you be the judge. As I stated, authorities believe Falls bears a slight resemblance to the police composites, and the fact that he lived in Kansas and Texas at the time, but they were never able to find anything concrete, and to this day, the case of the I-70 killings remains open and cold. Other likely victims of Neal Falls, though unconfirmed but heavily suspected by authorities, include 25-year-old Misty Marie Sands of Las Vegas, vanished on March 12, 2003. Her torso was found wrapped in black trash bags and bed sheets on a desert road leading to the Rock Canyon National Conservation Area. Her legs have never been found. 19-year-old Jody Brewer was found in San Bernardino County, California, only 25 miles from the Nevada border. Her torso was found wrapped in plastic and was identified by her tattoos. A bed sheet was uncovered near Interstate 15, and it is thought that the sheet was related to the discovery of her body. On August 14th, Jody Brewer had been dropped off at the Harbor Island Club apartments by her boyfriend. When no one heard from her, her mother reported her missing. A witness came forward and stated they saw her get into a white car with California plates. 21-year-old Lindsay Marie Harris vanished from her home in Henderson, Nevada on May 4, 2005. She was last seen at a bank making a deposit. Her rental car was found abandoned in the desert. Her legs were discovered by a group of children on May 23, 2005, only 15 miles south of where Neal Falls lived and held a firearms permit. The rest of Lindsay Harris has never been found. Falls was heavily suspected but never confirmed to be responsible. In a recent development, police looked into whether or not the possibility of the recently named suspect in the Long Island serial killer case, Rex Heuermann, was responsible, as he and his wife purchased a condo in Nevada shortly before her disappearance. 25-year-old Megan Nicole Lancaster was running errands in Wheelersburg, Ohio on the night of July 21, 2013, and when she didn't return home, where she lived with her parents, they called the police. 2 days later, her car was found abandoned at a Rally's restaurant in Portsmouth, Ohio, with her wallet lying on the passenger seat. 27-year-old Holly Renee Logan vanished from Columbus, Ohio on July 21, 2013. Her friend, 22-year-old Jamie Mallon Bowen, was last seen in the area of Parsons and Stewart Avenue in Columbus, Ohio, April 10, 2014. She was heading from her sister's home to her parents when she disappeared. No trace of either woman has ever been found. Charlotte Eliza Trago, 27, was last seen in the Chillicothe, Ohio area on May 3, 2013, after her roommate evicted her and she set out on foot. Her friend, a 30-year-old mother of 3, Tamika Lynch, vanished the same day. Lynch's body was found 3 weeks after her disappearance in Paint Creek. The autopsy report indicated that she succumbed to an OD, but the exact circumstances and causes of her expiration were listed as unknown. Her family still believes foul play was involved. 37-year-old Wanda Jean Lemons was last seen in Chillicothe on November 3, 2014. She suddenly stopped communication with her family after messaging her daughters on Facebook, saying she was trying to hitchhike to Galveston, Texas. No one has ever heard from her again. Shasta Himmelrich, age 20, vanished December 25, 2014 in Chillicothe. CCTV footage shows her at a Speedway gas station at approximately 3:15 a.m. Her abandoned car was discovered at a junction near Higbee Bridge, which crosses the Scioto River in Ross County, Ohio. The driver and passenger doors were open, and the car's battery was dead, and the car was out of gas. Shasta was found in the Scioto River, and her family strongly disagrees with the official ruling that she entered the water willingly with the intention not to come back out. 26-year-old Tiffany Sayre vanished May 11, 2015. Her body was found by 2 people walking along a creek near Cave Road in Highland County, Ohio, which is only 30 miles to the west of Chillicothe, Ohio. She was found wrapped in a bedsheet and was thought to have been heading to Chillicothe Inn at the time of her disappearance, which is a motel authorities say has a reputation as a site for women of the night to ply their trade. All of the suspected victims I just listed dealt in the sale of the flesh, so-called ladies of the night, and most advertised themselves in online ads just like Heather Saul. And so as the curtains came to a close for Falls when Heather Saul got his gun, Neil Falls' moment of weakness was her moment of strength. And while she thought she was merely defending herself, she had no idea in that moment she was stopping a completely undetected serial killer who operated under the radar of authorities. Heather saved her own life that day and likely the lives of countless others. We may never know the true extent of the victims of Neil Falls, but thankfully he was stopped that day by a woman who fought bravely for her survival and won.
And that concludes tonight's feature presentation of our double feature. I have been your host, Johnny Saturnine. Thank you for taking a chance on a small channel. Please deposit your popcorn buckets in the nearest trash receptacle on the way out and drive safely. Join me again soon for another screening of Saturnine stories. Good night.